Rain hammered the old tin roof, each drop a restless finger tapping out its impatience on Evelyn Harper's world. The light outside her ranch
Mom,
house faded
please.
into bruised purple,
Just think about the
swallowing the
rescue.
plains in
For
Montana's
the horses
relentless
and
dusk.
for you.
Evelyn stood by the window,
She's
her
been waiting
shoulders
for you,
hunched
Evelyn.
as if to brace against the coming night. She didn't move to touch the plate cooling on the table behind her, nor did she turn on the lamp. Instead, she let the darkness creep in, inch by inch, as she watched wild grass beaten flat by the downpour. Beyond the muddy yard, ghostly shapes of horses drifted behind barbed wire, flickering in and out of view with the sway of the rain. Inside, the air was thick with the echo of things lost. Evelyn's fingers, still nimble from decades teaching music, now fidgeted with the corner of a faded photograph. In it, her late husband, Sam, grinned beneath his old Stetson, his arm thrown carelessly around a sturdy chestnut gelding, the one she'd lost to a harsh winter just months before Sam passed. She traced the faces with her thumb, feeling the rough edge of grief, sharp as the wind outside. Loneliness settled into her bones like the chill in the air, constant, unrelenting. Her phone buzzed on the table, lighting up with a new message from Cassidy, her only daughter. Cassidy's voice was always so full of hope, so determined to drag Evelyn back into the world, no matter how much she resisted. Evelyn could almost hear her. "Mom, there's a mare at the Bitterroot Valley Rescue who needs you. Just think about it, please." She hadn't replied yet. The idea of another horse clawed at her insides, not with longing but with dread. The pain of losing them, again and again, was almost unbearable. Thunder cracked, rattling the window glass. Evelyn slumped into the kitchen chair, burying her face in her hands. The house seemed to sigh around her, a hollow sound. For a long moment she let the tears fall, silent and hot, slipping down her cheeks and pooling in the lines etched by years of laughter, heartbreak, and endurance. She whispered Sam's name, the sound barely a breath. The ache was sharp, a familiar companion she both feared and clung to. Outside, the storm raged. A distant whinny drifted through the open window, so faint she almost missed it. Evelyn closed her eyes, heart thudding, memory flickering with images of horses, her gelding, Sam singing in the barn, Cassidy as a child with straw in her hair. Each memory felt both precious and dangerous, a reminder of how much she'd risked by loving and how much she'd lost. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Cassidy, more insistent this time. "Just go see her, Mom. You don't have to decide right away." "But you can't go on like this." Evelyn stared at the words, anger and sadness fighting in her chest. Why did Cassidy want her to open up again? Why couldn't she understand that some doors, once closed, are safer that way? Evelyn pushed the phone aside, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Was her fear really about the horses, or about facing life alone again and possibly losing herself in the grief she'd tried so hard to outrun? The rain eased, drumming softer now, like a heartbeat slowing after a long chase. Outside, the land seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn stood and wandered back to the window, the photograph still clutched in her hand. The fields glistened under the moody sky, the horizon blurred where land met cloud. Suddenly, headlights flashed in the drive, Cassidy's battered Subaru, stubborn and familiar. Evelyn watched her daughter step into the mud, jacket pulled tight, resolve in every line of her walk. The door swung open and Cassidy's voice called out, echoing in the empty house, "Mom, are you up?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood in the kitchen, breath held, heart pounding. Cassidy appeared in the doorway, wet hair framing her face, concern written in the furrow of her brow. "You can't keep living like this, Mom," she said gently. "I know it hurts, but I don't want to lose you too." The words hung heavy between them. Evelyn looked away, her gaze landing on the old photo again. "I'm just tired, Cass," she whispered. "So tired of starting over, so tired of goodbyes." Cassidy came close, kneeling by her mother's chair, her hand warm on Evelyn's. "Sometimes," she said, voice steady, "the only way out of the dark is to let a little light in. Even if it hurts. Will you come with me tomorrow? Just to see the mare, that's all I'm asking." Evelyn wanted to refuse, to retreat. But the storm outside was finally quieting, and in the stillness, the old ache loosened its grip just a little. She nodded once, more a surrender than a decision. Cassidy hugged her, tight and quick, and Evelyn let herself lean into it, if only for a second. Later, as she lay in bed, the silence felt less suffocating. She listened to the wind chasing itself through the grass, the memory of Sam's laughter echoing in the halls, and wondered, not for the first time, if hope was worth the risk. As sleep crept in, the question lingered, unresolved. Was it possible to love again, knowing everything that could be lost? And if she dared, would she ever find the courage to try? Dawn crept slow and uncertain across the Montana plains, gray light dripping through the clouds and pooling on the kitchen floor. Evelyn Harper hadn't slept much, her mind circling the old fears and the fragile possibility her daughter had planted the night before. Cassidy was already up, making coffee in that brisk, efficient way she'd inherited from her father. Evelyn sat quietly, hands wrapped around her mug, letting the silence stretch between them. She wondered if Cassidy could hear the doubt rattling inside her chest. After breakfast, Cassidy loaded them into her weathered Subaru, windshield wipers squeaking as they rolled out of the drive. The road to Bitterroot Valley Equine Rescue wound past half-flooded fields and the broken skeletons of last season's hay bales. The world felt small, hemmed in by the low clouds, but Cassidy's grip on the steering wheel was steady. She glanced at her mother, a mix of hope and worry in her eyes. "You don't have to decide anything today, Mom," she said softly. "We're just looking." Evelyn nodded, but words caught in her throat. The ranch faded behind them, swallowed by the distance and the rain. They pulled up beside a long, battered barn, the Bitterroot sign hanging askew, shivering in the wind. The scent of damp hay and anxious horses hit Evelyn as soon as she stepped out. Inside, the rescue was a world of its own, dozens of horses shifting in their stalls, the chorus of nervous whinnies and the sharp clatter of hooves against concrete. Volunteers hurried past with pitchforks and buckets, their boots caked in mud. The air was thick with tension and animal warmth. Cassidy led Evelyn through the chaos, her arm gently supporting her mother's elbow. Evelyn's hands trembled, not from cold, but from the overwhelming energy in the barn. A dark gelding tossed his head at their passing, teeth bared in a restless display. Loud neighs rang out, ricocheting off tin walls, and Evelyn found herself flinching at each sudden sound. A middle-aged man approached, broad-shouldered, gentle-eyed, with a name tag that read Ben. Cassidy introduced him as a longtime volunteer. He gave Evelyn a smile full of quiet understanding and led them down the row of stalls. "She's at the end," Ben said. "Away from the others for now. Needs a little peace." They stopped in front of a stall unlike the rest. There, in the shadow, stood a mare, a deep brown with a black mane streaked by time, her gaze unwavering and impossibly calm. While other horses danced and whinnied, this one stood still, head slightly tilted, dark eyes fixed on Evelyn. "This is Marigold," Ben said, his voice reverent. "She belonged to an old rancher up near the state line. Had her since she was a filly. He's moved into assisted living now. Couldn't keep her. She's quiet, watches everything, doesn't rush." Evelyn stood rooted to the spot. For a moment, everything else, the noise, the cold, her pounding heart, fell away. Marigold watched her with an intelligence that felt almost human, as if she could see straight through Evelyn's brittle exterior. The distance between them was just a few feet, but it felt like years. Cassidy whispered, "Mom, she's beautiful." Evelyn's mouth was dry. "She looks lonely," she said, the words surprising her as they slipped out. Ben nodded. "She's adjusting. Most rescues are skittish, but Marigold's just waiting, like she's looking for something she lost." Something in Evelyn's chest shifted. A memory of Sam leading their old chestnut gelding out of the rain, the way he used to say every horse has its own song if you listen close enough. She wanted to reach out to lay a hand on Marigold's neck, but her feet wouldn't move. The risk felt enormous, the fear almost overwhelming. Cassidy broke the silence, her voice gentle but insistent. "You could try, Mom. Just say hello." Evelyn took a step, her heart hammering. Marigold didn't back away. Instead, The mare's ears flicked forward, her breath soft and steady. Evelyn reached out but stopped short, her hand trembling in the air between them. They stood like that for what felt like hours, the busy world of the rescue falling away until it was only Evelyn and the quiet brown mare, both suspended between past and future, longing and fear. Cassidy's phone buzzed in her pocket, shattering the moment. Evelyn dropped her hand, retreating into herself. Ben gave her an understanding look. "No rush," he said quietly. "Sometimes it takes a while." As they walked the barn again, Cassidy tried to make conversation, pointing out other horses, sharing stories about the rescue. Evelyn barely heard her. Every step seemed to circle back to Marigold, her stillness, her steady gaze, the quiet plea in her eyes. Outside, the rain slackened, a weak sun breaking through the clouds for the first time that day. Back at the car, Evelyn lingered, her mind at war. Cassidy waited, not pushing, but her hope was palpable, filling the space between them. Evelyn stared down at her mud-splattered boots, the old ache in her chest rising again. She imagined what it would be like, bringing Marigold home, risking her heart, exposing herself to the possibility of joy and loss all over again. The thought both terrified and thrilled her. Finally, Cassidy broke the silence, voice raw and sincere. "It's okay to be scared, Mom, but you taught me that loving someone, even when you know you might lose them, is the bravest thing you can do." Evelyn closed her eyes, tears pricking at the edges. For the first time in a long time, she let herself consider hope, not as a threat, but as a possibility. She turned to Cassidy and nodded, her voice just a whisper. "I'll try. For today, I'll try." Cassidy's relief was a warmth that filled the car. As they drove home, Evelyn let herself imagine a future she hadn't dared to dream, a life with Marigold, the risk and the beauty entwined. The sky outside was clearing, pale blue peeking through the storm clouds. But inside Evelyn, a new storm brewed, a mix of terror and hope, longing and fear, the first real sign that the wall around her heart might be ready to crack. The first morning with Marigold home felt foreign, like slipping into an old coat and finding it tighter than you remembered. The storm had moved on, leaving puddles scattered like broken mirrors across the fields, reflecting a sky washed clean by rain. Evelyn Harper woke before sunrise, heart jittery with anticipation and dread. She lingered by the window, watching Marigold in the new paddock, head bowed, motionless, dark coat shining where the early sun broke through the clouds. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock and the groan of old floorboards under Evelyn's careful steps. She brewed coffee and set about her chores, moving through the kitchen as if in a trance. She'd spent decades tending to horses, feeding, brushing, cleaning stalls, patching up scrapes, but today it felt as though she was learning everything again for the first time. She carried a bucket of grain out to the barn, nerves making her hands clumsy. Marigold stood at the far end of the corral, ears pricked, tail flicking at the occasional fly. She didn't approach, but she watched, every muscle alert. Evelyn set the bucket down, avoiding the mare's gaze, forcing herself to move slowly, deliberately. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely louder than the wind. "Good morning, girl. I hope you like oats." Marigold remained where she was, silent and unmoving. Evelyn busied herself with the fence, checking for loose nails, eyes flicking up every few seconds to study her new companion. The quiet between them was not hostile, but cautious. Two survivors circling the edges of their own grief. Inside, the ranch house echoed with memories. Sometimes Evelyn caught a whiff of Sam's aftershave in the hallway or heard the faint echo of Cassidy's childhood laughter rising from the staircase. She found herself avoiding the living room, where old saddles and faded photographs kept vigil. At night, the house felt haunted, the air heavy with things unsaid. Cassidy visited daily, bringing homemade soup or groceries, her tone gentle, careful not to crowd her mother. "You doing okay?" she'd ask, not prying, just letting the words hang in the air. Evelyn always answered the same way, "We're managing." In truth, Evelyn did everything to keep her distance from Marigold. She swept the porch, mended a ripped curtain, organized the pantry. She scrubbed the kitchen counters twice in one afternoon, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. Every time she glanced outside, Marigold was there, watching, waiting, but never intruding. One evening, as a chill settled over the land, Evelyn stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the fading light. Marigold stood close to the house, just outside the window, unmoving. The mare's presence felt patient and persistent, like a question Evelyn wasn't ready to answer. She could see the rise and fall of Marigold's breath, the soft flex of her nostrils as she sniffed the evening air. For a moment, Evelyn pressed her palm to the glass, wishing she had the courage to step outside. Later that night, Evelyn tossed in bed, unable to find comfort in the familiar. The distant sound of Marigold's hooves thudded softly against the earth, a quiet rhythm beneath the wind. It comforted her, and unsettled her all at once. She wondered if Marigold slept at all, or if the horse, like her, paced circles in the darkness, haunted by things left behind. In the morning, Evelyn woke to find Marigold still near the house. The mare hadn't retreated to the distant fields like the other horses had done. Instead, she'd spent the night standing vigil under the kitchen window, as if guarding something too delicate to name. Evelyn was struck by the realization. Marigold's cautious yearning mirrored her own. Both had known loss. Both craved connection, but feared its cost. Determined to try, Evelyn filled a bucket with water and carried it out, her steps slower, more deliberate. Marigold watched but didn't move. Evelyn set the bucket down and crouched nearby, the cold damp seeping through her jeans. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you?" she whispered, almost smiling. "I guess we have that in common." The silence stretched, filled with the rustle of grass and the distant call of a meadowlark. Evelyn sat for a while, letting the quiet wrap around her. She didn't try to touch Marigold, didn't push. She just stayed. That became their routine. Each day, Evelyn found small excuses to be near, mending a fence post, pulling weeds by the paddock, reading aloud from an old book on the porch. Marigold lingered nearby, curious but careful, never demanding, never turning away. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind a bank of clouds, Evelyn noticed Marigold dozing on her feet just outside the barn. Horses often slept standing, but this was different. The mare had chosen to rest close to the house, in full view of the kitchen window, even as the other horses wandered further away. It was a subtle gesture, but it felt like a first step, an offering of trust. That night, as Evelyn lay in bed, the familiar ache in her chest had softened, replaced by something fragile but warm. She listened for Marigold's hooves, their steady rhythm now a comfort, not a reminder of what she'd lost. She realized she was waiting, not for grief to leave her, but for something new to grow in its place. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn allowed herself to hope that she might not be alone forever. The days blurred together in a slow, uncertain rhythm. Montana's weather softened, grass turning green again, and the mud finally receded. But inside Evelyn Harper's old ranch house, the air still carried the heaviness of a winter that refused to end. Each day the routines grew familiar, chores in the barn, careful glances exchanged with Marigold, the steady presence of Cassidy dropping by with a pie or fresh apples. Yet beneath the ordinary, a silent struggle raged, invisible but relentless. Cassidy worried about her mother's growing isolation. She'd always been able to read Evelyn, even when words failed. Now she lingered longer after every visit, searching for signs that her mother was returning to herself. One afternoon she found Evelyn standing at the window, hands pressed tight against the glass, eyes tracking Marigold's slow circuit of the paddock. "You know, you can talk to her," Cassidy said, voice soft. "Horses listen. They understand more than we think." Evelyn just shrugged, offering a faint smile that never quite reached her eyes. "I know. I'm not sure what I'd say." She let the curtain fall back into place, retreating into the comfort of silence. But Marigold didn't give up. The mare was patient, a living question Evelyn could never fully answer. She tried subtle gestures, a low nicker when Evelyn passed by, nudging the barn door open when Evelyn lingered too long inside, lowering her head respectfully whenever they locked eyes. Sometimes Evelyn would catch Marigold watching her with that deep, knowing gaze, as if the mare could see straight through her defenses. Nights were the hardest. As dusk settled, old memories crept in with the darkness. Evelyn would sit in her faded armchair, the radio turned low, hands worrying the hem of a blanket Sam had bought her one Christmas. The house whispered with echoes, Sam's baritone, thick with laughter, drifting from the barn, the warmth of his arms around her, the rhythm of his boots across the floorboards, the sweet, grassy smell of their old chestnut gelding, who'd slept outside the bedroom window every spring. She missed the way Sam used to sing to the horses, a simple tune that seemed to make everything right. One night, as thunder muttered on the horizon, Evelyn found herself outside under a bruised sky, drawn by the pull of grief and habit. She leaned against the paddock fence, the boards rough beneath her palms, and watched Marigold move through the dusk, fluid and calm, tail swishing in the cool air. "I don't know what I'm doing, girl," Evelyn murmured, her voice thin. "I'm scared, not of you, but of losing myself again." The words surprised her. They sounded raw, unfinished. After Sam died, and then the gelding, I started thinking maybe it was easier to just stop caring, easier not to risk the hurt. But I can't help it. Every time I look at you, I feel it all coming back. The hope, the fear. A tremor shook her voice, tears stinging at the corners of her eyes. For a moment, the old pain rose up, a black tide threatening to drown her. She pressed her forehead to the fence, breath shaky. "I don't want to get lost in it again." She barely noticed Marigold stepping close. So quiet her approach was more suggestion than sound. The mare lowered her head, exhaling softly, warm breath ghosting over Evelyn's hand where it gripped the fence. Evelyn stayed still, hardly daring to breathe. Then, gentle as a prayer, Marigold rested her head on the fence, just inches from Evelyn's trembling hand. The moment stretched, filled with the pulse of Evelyn's heartbeat and the scent of horse and earth. Carefully, almost without thinking, Evelyn reached out and scratched behind Marigold's ears, fingers brushing through her mane. The contact was tentative at first, but Marigold didn't pull away. It was the first real connection since everything had changed. Evelyn stood in the half-light, stroking Marigold's neck, tears running freely now, feeling something deep inside begin to give way. She talked in halting sentences, about Sam, about the chestnut gelding, about the way loneliness could press so hard it left bruises on your spirit. Marigold listened, ears flicking, breathing slow and steady. After that night, something subtle shifted. Evelyn found herself drawn outside more often, searching for Marigold's company. The routine softened. She lingered at the fence after chores, humming old songs Sam used to sing. Marigold, for her part, responded with gentle nudges, quiet nickers, and an easy presence that filled the empty spaces inside Evelyn's heart. Cassidy noticed the change. She came by one afternoon to find her mother laughing, a sound she hadn't heard in months, as Marigold chased her own shadow across the paddock. Evelyn's cheeks were flushed, eyes bright with something new. "See, Mom?" Cassidy smiled, relief in every word. "She's good for you." Evelyn nodded, reaching up to wipe a tear from her cheek. "She's teaching me how to trust again, Cass. I think I needed that more than I realized." In the evenings, Evelyn would sometimes sit by the barn, Marigold's head resting on her lap, both watching the stars blink into existence above the prairie. The fear was still there, grief never truly left, but it was no longer the only thing she felt. There was room now for hope, for gentle laughter, for the slow rebuilding of a life she'd once thought was over. For the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that healing was possible, not by forgetting the past, but by honoring it with each quiet, patient moment of connection. The wind had a sharp edge that night, slicing through the empty fields and rattling the bare branches that lined the Harper Ranch. It was the kind of cold that crawled through the walls and settled deep in your bones, the kind of night when even the stars seemed to shiver behind thin clouds. Evelyn Harper shuffled from kitchen to mudroom, checking windows, turning out lights, lost in the rhythm of routine. She paused at the back door, peering into the blackness beyond the porch lamp, scanning for the faint outline of Marigold in the yard. A memory tugged at her. Sam, all those years ago, out in the barn after midnight, humming under his breath as he brushed down their old gelding. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the memory warm her for a moment before the chill crept back in. She pulled her cardigan tighter and stepped outside, boots crunching on the frost-slicked ground. Marigold was waiting near the paddock, her dark silhouette almost blending with the night. Evelyn felt a flicker of comfort at the sight. The mare's ears pricked as Evelyn approached, and she let out a soft nicker, breath blooming white in the cold air. Evelyn leaned on the fence, watching Marigold for a few long, peaceful minutes. The ranch was so quiet she could hear the distant howl of a coyote and the slow, steady thump of her own heart. She turned to head back inside, lost in thought, and that's when it happened. Her boots slipped on a patch of muddy ice by the barn step. Her ankle twisted violently, pain shooting up her leg, and she went down hard into the wet, freezing earth. She cried out, but the sound was swallowed by the wind. The world spun, pain radiating from her ankle to her hip. Evelyn tried to stand, but her leg buckled, a fresh wave of agony blurring her vision. She gritted her teeth, blinking back tears. Mud soaked into her jeans, chilling her to the core. She called for help, voice cracking, but the night only answered with silence. Fear clawed at her chest. She was alone, truly alone, and the weight of it pressed down on her harder than the pain in her ankle. Panic edged in, sharp and cold. Cassidy was probably already home in town. No one would hear her out here. But she wasn't quite alone. Marigold, sensing the trouble, moved swiftly. The mare approached, head low, nostrils flaring as she took in the scent of Evelyn's fear and pain. She let out an anxious nicker, pawing the ground near Evelyn's outstretched hand. "Easy, girl," Evelyn whispered, trying to keep her voice steady as the pain gnawed at her resolve. Marigold pressed closer, her warmth radiating in the chill, and nudged at Evelyn's shoulder with her nose, as if urging her to get up. Evelyn tried again, bracing herself against the mare's sturdy body, but her ankle screamed in protest and she collapsed back into the mud, breath hissing through her teeth. Marigold stayed with her, refusing to leave. The horse pawed the ground, circled back and nickered again, this time louder, more insistent. She bent her neck and tried again to nudge Evelyn upright, her big body a shield against the wind. When it was clear Evelyn couldn't rise, Marigold made a decision that would forever change their story. She turned and trotted purposefully toward the house, hooves splashing through the puddles and mud. She reached the porch, reared up, her front hooves rapping hard against the door, her whinny echoing through the kitchen like an alarm bell. Inside, the house phone began to ring. Cassidy, unable to sleep, had decided to check in. But what Cassidy heard instead after several unanswered rings was the sound of banging and the frantic cries of a horse. It jolted her. She hung up and grabbed her keys, heart pounding, racing down the highway toward the ranch. Ben, the rescue volunteer who'd grown into a loyal friend, happened to be passing through town and saw Cassidy's headlights flying down the back road. Trusting her urgency, he followed without question. When they arrived, breathless and wide-eyed, the porch light was swinging from its chain, Marigold still stamping at the door, nostrils flared, eyes wild but determined. Cassidy threw her arms around Marigold's neck, murmuring thanks, before racing outside. Ben trailed after, flashlight bobbing through the darkness. They found Evelyn sprawled in the mud, face pale with pain but eyes shining with stubborn hope. Relief crashed through Cassidy as she knelt beside her mother. Ben carefully checked Evelyn's ankle, shaking his head. "It's bad, but not broken. Let's get you inside." They half-carried, half-dragged Evelyn back into the warmth of the house, mud trailing behind them, Marigold hovering outside the window, her face pressed close to the glass. Evelyn's hands were cold, but she clung tight to Cassidy, tears slipping down her cheeks, not just from pain, but from gratitude and awe. For the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself to lean on the people and animals who loved her. She let Cassidy bandage her ankle, let Ben fuss with hot tea and extra blankets, let Marigold's worried face at the window fill her with a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since Sam was alive. When the house finally quieted, Cassidy sat at her mother's side, brushing damp hair from Evelyn's forehead. "You're lucky, Mom," she whispered. "You have Marigold." Evelyn smiled through her tears, her voice trembling but strong. "I know, Cass. I'm starting to believe it too." Outside, Marigold stood sentinel in the yard, her breath clouding the glass, watching over Evelyn until the first pink light of dawn crept over the prairie. For both horse and human, something essential had shifted. Trust, fragile but real, taking root in the muddy soil of a hard night. Dawn broke cold and glassy over the Montana plains, light trickling in through the curtains as if afraid to disturb the quiet inside the Harper house. Evelyn lay on the couch, her ankle swaddled in layers of bandages and ice, the throbbing pain a dull background to the swirl of emotions left by the night before. Cassidy was still asleep in the guest room, exhausted from worry and the late-night dash. Ben had slept upright in a kitchen chair, chin on his chest, his boots abandoned in a muddy heap by the door. Evelyn drifted in and out of dreams until she woke to a gentle tapping at the window. At first she thought it was the wind, but as her eyes focused, she saw Marigold's large, watchful face peering in from the yard. The mare's eyes were bright with concern, ears flicking every time Evelyn moved. That sight, the anxious horse waiting outside, refusing to stray far from the house, stirred something so deep in Evelyn she pressed a hand to her heart, as if to steady it. Cassidy appeared, yawning, hair wild, and brought coffee to her mother's side. "How's your ankle?" she asked, trying to sound matter-of-fact, but her eyes shimmered with worry. Evelyn smiled, a little stronger than before. "Hurts like the devil. But I'm here, and so is Marigold." She nodded toward the window, where the mare still stood sentinel. "She wouldn't leave me alone last night, like she knew something was wrong." Cassidy sat, tucking her legs under her. "She saved you, Mom. Without her, who knows how long you would have been out there." Evelyn's throat closed at the thought. She didn't want to dwell on it, not with so much gratitude blooming inside her chest. When Ben woke, he insisted Evelyn keep off her ankle, threatening to call a doctor himself if she refused. After a heated exchange, one that ended with a rare laugh from Evelyn, Cassidy drove her to the clinic in town. The doctor confirmed what Ben suspected, a bad sprain, but no fracture. "You'll need rest, Mrs. Harper," he warned, handing over a pair of crutches. "No barn chores, no fence mending. Let people help you." Evelyn bristled but nodded, trying to hide her discomfort at the idea of relying on anyone. As Cassidy helped her back into the car, Evelyn glanced back at the rescue barn visible from the main road, thinking of all the horses inside and the hands that tended them. She realized, for the first time, how vulnerable they must feel, how much courage it took to trust help from others. Back at the ranch, Cassidy and Ben sprang into action. Ben took over feeding the horses, cleaning stalls, and fixing the loose paddock gate. Cassidy managed the house, cooking meals, fluffing pillows, and reminding her mother over and over to rest. Evelyn grumbled but secretly cherished the fuss. It felt like being cared for, not pitied. But the biggest change came in the long, slow hours of waiting. Evelyn was confined to the house. Her world shrunk to the living room, her view limited to the stretch of window that overlooked the yard and the paddock beyond. At first, she felt restless, useless, like a ghost haunting her own home. She would watch Ben work in the barn, Cassidy scatter hay, but always, always, her eyes found Marigold. The mare kept close to the house, grazing where Evelyn could see her, lifting her head every few minutes as if to check on her human. Sometimes when Cassidy cracked the window to let in fresh air, Evelyn would talk to Marigold, her voice soft and full of gratitude. "You saved my life, you know," she whispered once, voice thick with emotion. Marigold's ears flicked forward, her big dark eyes calm, a living answer to Evelyn's confession. A new ritual grew between them. In the late afternoon, when the sun slanted low and golden across the fields, Evelyn would settle into a chair by the window and read aloud. Old letters from Sam, poetry she loved, bits of music theory that made Cassidy groan with mock agony. Marigold always seemed to listen, her head angled toward the sound, tail swishing in the grass. The simple act of sharing her world, even through glass, became a lifeline for Evelyn, a reminder that even in stillness, bonds could grow deeper. One evening, as Cassidy was helping her mother to the porch for a breath of cool air, Marigold approached, drawn by the sound of Evelyn's laughter. The mare stopped at the bottom of the steps and waited, patient and dignified. Evelyn reached for her, fingers brushing Marigold's soft muzzle. and a wave of gratitude swept through her, so sudden and fierce that she had to blink away tears. "Thank you," she murmured. Marigold pressed her nose into Evelyn's palm, warm breath mingling with the twilight. Inside, Ben prepared dinner. He'd found a recipe for beef stew that filled the house with rich, savory warmth. The three of them ate together, sharing stories, laughing at old memories. The fear and loneliness that had haunted Evelyn for months was fading, replaced by a sense of belonging she'd forgotten she could feel. But it wasn't just her own healing that Evelyn noticed. Marigold, too, seemed to be changing. She was calmer, less withdrawn, more present each day. She lingered near the house, seeking Evelyn's company, standing guard at night beneath her window. The old barriers, built from years of grief and caution, were crumbling on both sides. By the time the stars emerged, sharp and bright in the Montana sky, Evelyn found herself looking forward to tomorrow. She realized that healing didn't mean moving on without scars, but learning to live with them, to trust that love and hope could still have a place in her life. As she drifted to sleep, Marigold's silhouette outside was the last thing she saw. Steady, loyal, and for the first time, home. Montana's April wind carried the sharp scent of thawing earth and wild sage. For weeks, Evelyn Harper's life had narrowed to the measured pace of recovery. But with every day, as her ankle grew stronger, the world outside her window called to her. It began with the smallest acts, raising the sash, breathing in the dawn, pressing her palm to the glass whenever Marigold grazed close by. The pain in her ankle still throbbed, but it was no longer the center of her world. One morning, Cassidy found her mother sitting on the edge of the porch, crutch balanced against the rail, her face tilted to the sunlight. Marigold stood in the yard, head low as she tore mouthfuls of grass, her ears flicking in time with Evelyn's voice as she read from a tattered book of poems. Cassidy watched from the doorway, an ache of pride in her chest. The ranch felt different now, not just a place weighed down by loss, but a home waking up after a long winter. When Evelyn finally took her first slow steps back to the barn, the air trembled with a quiet excitement. The ground was soft, patched with pale green shoots and clumps of last year's straw. Marigold met her at the gate, snorting softly, her warm breath swirling in the chill morning. Evelyn hesitated, but the mare stood perfectly still, inviting trust with every muscle. Gripping her crutch in one hand, Evelyn reached out and leaned against Marigold's sturdy shoulder. "That's it, girl," she whispered, heart fluttering. "Just like old times." The small act, allowing Marigold to steady her, was as significant as any spoken promise. Evelyn felt her balance return, not just to her body, but to her spirit. Each day she moved a little farther, pausing to brush Marigold's coat, run her hands along the smooth curve of her neck, or rest her forehead against the mare's mane. Marigold responded with the quiet patience of someone who understood the importance of slow healing. The changes spread through the ranch like light through a dusty room. Evelyn began to tend her neglected garden, planting tomatoes and beans with Cassidy kneeling beside her, laughter bubbling up as they fought over who could dig the straightest row. Ben, who'd become a near-daily presence, mended the sagging fence and set up an outdoor table beneath the apple tree. In the evenings, they ate simple meals together, stories and laughter echoing across the yard. But the greatest transformation was within Evelyn herself. The weight she had carried, the gnawing ache of loss, the constant fear of loving again, grew lighter each time she trusted Marigold. The mare's presence became a balm, her patient companionship a bridge back to a world that no longer seemed so empty. One golden afternoon, Evelyn caught Marigold rolling in the dust, legs kicking joyfully in the air. Sunlight caught the mare's chestnut coat, turning it the color of burnished copper. Evelyn laughed, a clear, full sound that startled even herself. For a moment she forgot her pain, her worries, her scars. It was just her and Marigold in the Montana sky, bright with promise. Later that week, Cassidy and Ben joined Evelyn for a small picnic beside the barn. Marigold stood close, her nose buried in the picnic basket, searching for apple slices. Ben teased Evelyn about her secret stash of peppermints for the horse, and Cassidy captured the moment with a photo. Evelyn, hair tousled by the wind, smiling at Marigold with a tenderness that said more than words ever could. As the days grew longer and the trees began to bud, Evelyn felt hope take root again. Not as a fragile, fleeting thing, but as a steady presence. She opened the barn doors wide, letting in light and fresh air, letting the world see that she was no longer hiding from life. Cassidy noticed the change, too. One evening, as she was helping her mother tie up the tomato plants, she said, "I haven't seen you this happy in a long time, Mom. Marigold's good for you, but I think you're good for her, too." Evelyn smiled, her eyes shining. "I think we saved each other, Cass. She gave me a reason to try again." And it was true. In small, almost invisible ways, Marigold had restored Evelyn's faith in new beginnings. The simple routines, feeding, grooming, quiet walks in the pasture, became rituals of healing. The walls Evelyn had built around her heart, out of necessity and sorrow, crumbled with every gentle nudge, every shared silence, every moment of trust. One night, under a canopy of stars, Evelyn led Marigold through the paddock, the horse's hooves making soft music in the dark. They moved together in perfect harmony, two souls who had survived storms and loss, and found something beautiful on the other side. Back inside, as Evelyn settled onto the couch, Cassidy handed her the photo she'd taken at the picnic. Evelyn studied it, the image of herself and Marigold radiating joy. She traced the outline of the mare's face, her own smile reflected in the glossy print. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, not just to Marigold but to herself and to the memory of all she'd lost. For the first time in years, Evelyn believed it. Summer came late to Montana that year, sweeping in on warm winds and sudden bursts of wildflowers. By June, Evelyn Harper's limp had faded to a faint memory, just a small hesitation at the start of each morning, a quiet reminder of all she'd been through. The ranch buzzed with a new kind of energy, windows thrown open to the sun, laughter echoing across the yard, Marigold's coat gleaming as she trotted through fresh grass. But the change in Evelyn wasn't just physical. The slow months of healing had kindled something inside her, a hunger to give back, to reach beyond the fences she'd spent so long building. One Saturday, Cassidy arrived with an armful of flyers and a familiar, conspiratorial grin. "You ready?" she teased, waving the papers. "The rescue needs volunteers. I thought you could help." Evelyn hesitated, old nerves fluttering in her chest. For years, she'd hidden from crowds, from strangers, from anything that threatened the fragile piece she'd stitched together. But Cassidy's eyes sparkled with hope, and something inside Evelyn, something shaped by Marigold's steadfast presence, answered, yes. So Evelyn and Cassidy drove out to Bitterroot Valley Equine Rescue, the road winding past sun-baked hills and blooming lupine. The barn was a world alive, the soft shuffle of hooves on straw, voices raised in gentle encouragement, the sharp, grassy scent of hay. Ben was already there, sleeves rolled, brushing down a nervous paint colt. He grinned when he saw Evelyn, relief and admiration mingling in his expression. At first, Evelyn kept to the edges, observing the chaos from the safety of a stall. But Cassidy nudged her forward, and Marigold, brought along as a quiet ambassador, seemed to sense her need for reassurance, walking calmly at her side. Soon, Evelyn found herself with a gentle gray-muzzled gelding, his body trembling, eyes wide with old fears. She remembered what it felt like, to be so unsure, so wary of reaching out. She moved slow, letting her voice carry calm into the stall, her hands steady as she stroked the horse's shoulder. After a while, the gelding relaxed, dropping his head to her chest with a deep sigh. Evelyn smiled through tears she didn't bother to hide. She wasn't just helping the horse. She was tending to a part of herself she'd long neglected. As the days passed, the rescue work grew into a routine. Every week, Evelyn and Cassidy volunteered, feeding, cleaning, whispering encouragement to horses whose trust had been battered by the world. Marigold quickly became a star of the rescue, her quiet patience easing even the most anxious newcomers. The other volunteers began to ask Evelyn for advice, and soon she was leading small training sessions, sharing her years of experience in gentle, precise words. One crisp morning, as summer threatened to turn, Evelyn watched an older woman struggle with a frightened foal in the far paddock. The woman's hands trembled, her frustration mounting, the foal dancing away each time she approached. Evelyn saw herself in that woman, lost, hesitant, desperate to connect, but afraid to fail. Leaving Marigold with Cassidy, Evelyn walked over, her steps slow and deliberate. May I? She asked softly, nodding to the foal. The woman stepped back, relief and embarrassment in her eyes. Evelyn crouched low, her voice barely above a whisper, letting the foal come to her. She offered a handful of grain, waited, and when the tiny horse finally stretched forward, Evelyn's face lit up with quiet triumph. That's it, she murmured, handing the lead rope to the woman. Sometimes you just have to wait. Let them come to you. Later, as Evelyn sipped lemonade with Cassidy and Ben beneath the old apple tree, the rescue director approached. You know, Evelyn, people listen when you talk. And the horses do too. Would you speak at the next adoption event? Maybe share your story? Evelyn hesitated, the old doubts returning. She remembered the years of silence, the times she'd chosen solitude over risk, the ache of hiding her scars. But Cassidy squeezed her hand, and Marigold nudged her elbow, as if to remind her of all she'd survived. Yes, Evelyn said quietly. I'd be honored. The adoption event was held in late September, the fields gold and buzzing with bees. The rescue barn brimmed with families and volunteers, children chasing kittens through the grass. Evelyn stood at the fence with Marigold, her notes trembling in her hand. When her name was called, she stepped forward, heart pounding, Marigold's head resting on her shoulder for courage. She spoke of loss, of Sam, of the old gelding, of the years when grief had felt like a wall she'd never climb. She spoke of Marigold, of the slow, uncertain path back to hope, of the way healing sometimes meant letting others in. We think we come to rescue animals, she finished, voice steady now, but sometimes they rescue us right back. The crowd applauded, and Evelyn saw tears in more than a few eyes. Afterwards, people gathered around her and Marigold, asking questions, sharing their own stories of loss and second chances. One woman, a widow from Billings, hugged Evelyn tightly, whispering, "You gave me hope again." As the sun sank low, painting the world in amber, Evelyn stood at the fence with Marigold, Cassidy, and Ben at her side. She watched as a young girl led a rescued filly home, her laughter ringing out across the fields. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt a peace so deep it seemed to settle in her bones. She belonged, not just to her family or her ranch, but to a larger world of broken hearts, brave souls, and new beginnings. Autumn settled quietly over Ashland, painting the pastures in deep gold and bittersweet crimson. The air was tinged with wood smoke and the promise of colder nights. Evelyn Harper found herself wandering the fence line with Marigold each morning, the mare's breath curling in the chill, the grass brittle beneath their feet. The world felt at once old and new, a circle turning, always returning to the place where everything began. Evelyn's limp was gone, but she noticed a different kind of scar, one invisible, but woven deep into her days. For years, she'd believed grief was something to survive, a storm to be endured alone. She'd built walls high and silent, thinking they'd keep her safe, but it was Marigold's gentle presence that taught her otherwise. The true risk, Evelyn realized, wasn't in loving or losing, but in shutting herself off from the world's gifts. One gray morning, as Evelyn raked leaves beneath the apple tree, Cassidy came to her with a question. "Mom, would you come to my support group next week? Just to listen. Some of the women there are lost, I think, like you were. I think you could help them." Evelyn hesitated. She still struggled with crowds, with the sharp, unfiltered emotion of strangers, but she saw the hope in Cassidy's eyes, and something inside her softened. "I'll come," she promised, her voice quiet, but certain. That evening, Evelyn sat in her favorite chair by the window, Marigold dozing in the paddock beyond. She watched the sun drop behind the hills and let her mind wander back over the winding path she'd walked since Sam's death. The years of silence, the ache of absence, the stubborn spark of hope she'd tried to ignore. She thought of the night she fell in the mud, the pain, the helplessness, the sight of Marigold's face at the window, refusing to leave her side. For so long, Evelyn had been afraid to need anyone. She remembered how proud Sam used to be of her independence, how she'd always managed on her own, but that pride had become a kind of prison. "We're not meant to go it alone," she whispered into the dusk. Marigold, as if in answer, lifted her head and whickered softly, her shadow long and warm in the fading light. When the night of Cassidy's support group arrived, Evelyn dressed carefully, pulling on her softest sweater and the turquoise necklace Sam had given her one summer at the county fair. Cassidy drove, the car quiet except for the hum of the tires on gravel. Evelyn's hands shook in her lap, but she tried to steady herself by watching the dark fields roll past. The group met in a church basement, the walls lined with hopeful posters and old hymnals stacked on a piano bench. The circle of women greeted Evelyn kindly, their faces etched with worry, fatigue, and hope. At first, she simply listened. Stories of loss, loneliness, love that never got a second chance. She heard her own heart echoed in their words. When it was her turn, Evelyn took a breath. For a long time, I thought grief was something I had to carry alone. I thought that by shutting everyone out, I could keep from hurting so much. She paused, twisting her ring. But that just made the pain sharper. It wasn't until I let Marigold in, let myself be needed and let myself need her back, that I began to heal. Love doesn't replace what you've lost. It honors it. It lets you begin again. The women listened, some weeping quietly, others reaching for her hand. Evelyn felt her story spreading outward, a gentle ripple. By the end of the evening, a quiet sense of belonging had settled in her chest, a reminder that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to open your heart again and again. Afterward, Cassidy hugged her fiercely. "You helped them, Mom. You gave them hope." Evelyn smiled, her cheeks wet. "Maybe, but they helped me too. We all need reminders that it's okay to start over." Days passed, golden and cool. Evelyn took to journaling her thoughts, hoping that if she wrote her journey down, she could offer comfort to someone else, maybe a neighbor, maybe a stranger, maybe herself on a darker day. She described the way grief crept in, heavy and cold, and how unexpected joy, like a horse's nicker at dawn or the first frost on the grass, could shift something inside, letting light in where she thought there was none. One morning, as she sat in the barn brushing Marigold's mane, Ben stopped by. He leaned on the stall door, his usual easy smile softened by concern. "You seem lighter, Evelyn, like you finally put something down." Evelyn nodded, running her hand down Marigold's neck. "I think I did, Ben. I stopped thinking healing meant forgetting or moving on. It's about carrying my scars with grace, about letting new things in, even when I'm scared." Ben grinned, glancing at Marigold. "She taught you that, huh?" "She did," Evelyn replied. "She needed me to trust her, and I needed to be needed." That's what saved us both. As autumn deepened, Evelyn found herself sought after by volunteers at the rescue, neighbors facing their own storms, strangers who'd heard her story at the adoption event. She realized that her real healing had begun not the day she brought Marigold home, but the day she stopped pretending she was fine and allowed herself to reach for help. In the closing days of fall, Evelyn led a group of new volunteers along the pasture fence, teaching them to listen, to move slow, to let the horses come to them. She watched a young woman, eyes red-rimmed with recent loss, gently stroke a shy filly's muzzle. Evelyn smiled. She knew that kind of beginning. She knew now the quiet, persistent grace of second chances. She looked out at Marigold, grazing peacefully in the field, and felt gratitude rise up in her, steady and strong. She'd learned at last that love and loss could live side by side, that scars were not something to hide, but a testament to having loved deeply and well. And as the sun dipped behind the prairie, painting everything gold, Evelyn let herself believe that hope wasn't a fleeting visitor, but a companion she could trust, one that would return again and again on 4 steady hooves whenever she was brave enough to open the gate. Winter came early to Ashland, bringing a hush to the valley and a sparkle to every fence line. The old ranch house creaked with the cold, but inside, Evelyn Harper's heart was warmer than it had been in years. She sat by the wood stove in the soft glow of morning, watching steam curl from her mug. Through the window, Marigold paced the snowy pasture, her chestnut coat vivid against the pale world, moving with the slow confidence of one who knows her place. It was the season of endings and beginnings, a time when the community gathered to celebrate their work and look toward another year. At Bitterroot Valley Equine Rescue, the barn hummed with excitement. Banners strung along the rafters, volunteers hanging lanterns and brushing winter coats until they shone. For the first time since Sam's passing, Evelyn felt that same current of anticipation, as if life itself was holding its breath for what would come next. The community event was held on the shortest day of the year. By noon, families streamed in, bundled tight, their breath rising in clouds, arms loaded with gifts and treats for the horses. Evelyn stood at the gate, Marigold at her side, no longer the anxious rescue but a partner, a friend, a bridge between worlds. Ben brought out thermoses of cider, Cassidy herded children toward the hayrides, and laughter drifted through the cold air like birdsong. Inside the barn, a chart tracked the year's successes. For the first time ever, the rescue had placed a record number of senior horses, animals who, in other years, might have faced uncertain fates. Evelyn's story, and Marigold's, had touched something deep in people. Local news had even run a short segment, and letters had arrived from as far as Idaho and Wyoming, people asking how to help, or sharing tales of their own rescues. The highlight of the day was the Second Chances ceremony. Cassidy took the microphone first, telling the crowd how Marigold had changed not only her mother's life, but her own. Then Ben spoke, about the power of community, about the bonds that form when people and animals are given the space to heal. Finally, Evelyn stepped forward, her hands steady, her voice clear. She spoke from the heart. A year ago, I thought my story was winding down. I'd lost so much, and the fear of more loss nearly closed me off from everything and everyone I loved. But Marigold taught me that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about letting it teach you, shape you, even hurt you, so you can grow into the next version of yourself. There's no shame in carrying scars. They're proof of the love we've given and received. The barn was silent. The audience rapt. Evelyn looked at Marigold, who nuzzled her shoulder, then smiled at Cassidy and Ben. I stand here today surrounded by friends, family, and horses who have survived more than anyone knows. My wish for all of us is simple. Let's keep opening our hearts. Let's be a bridge for someone else, animal or human, who needs a way back to hope. You never know whose life you'll change. Sometimes it's your own. As applause rippled through the barn, Evelyn's eyes met those of an older man at the back, a widower she'd met at her support group. He tipped his hat, gratitude shining in his face. A little girl tugged her mother's hand, pointing at Marigold, her eyes wide with wonder. After the ceremony, Evelyn mingled among neighbors, answering questions, offering hugs, encouraging a shy teen who was thinking of adopting her first rescue. She found herself sought out by volunteers old and new, each one eager to learn, to share their stories, to ask advice. Evelyn realized, almost with surprise, that she'd become a mentor, a bridge, just as Marigold had been for her. When the afternoon waned, Evelyn and Marigold walked the snow-dusted pasture together. The world was quiet except for the crunch of their footsteps and the distant bark of a dog. Evelyn stopped to rest, watching Marigold graze beside a playful colt, her face relaxed and radiant. Cassidy joined her, looping an arm through her mother's, both silent in the shared comfort of the moment. You did it, Mom, Cassidy said. You made this place home again, not just for you, but for so many others. Evelyn squeezed her daughter's hand, her heart full. I think it's what Sam would have wanted. To keep giving, even when it's hard. To keep loving, even when it hurts. Ben approached with a mug of cider for each of them. They stood together, gazing over the land, pastures rolling white and endless under the sinking sun. The sky blushed pink, and for a moment time itself seemed to slow. Evelyn reflected on her journey, the years of solitude, the night of crisis, the quiet persistence of Marigold's loyalty. She understood now that true healing is not about erasing our scars, but wearing them with pride, knowing that each one marks a moment of courage. She'd learned that letting others in, whether person or horse, was not a weakness, but the very thing that made life meaningful. As evening settled, the community began to disperse. Evelyn lingered at the fence, hand resting on Marigold's warm neck, watching the mare nuzzle a new arrival. She smiled, a deep and honest smile, as she whispered, "Thank you for finding me." With Marigold by her side, Evelyn walked back toward the house, her pace unhurried, her steps sure. In every shadow and every light, she saw evidence of second chances, in the adopted horses, in new friendships, in her own reflection. She knew that tomorrow and every day after would bring fresh joys and inevitable sorrows. But she was no longer afraid. She carried her scars and her hope alike, certain that, whatever storms might come, she would never again face them alone. And in that final quiet, Evelyn understood. Life is made of second chances, of love returned, of hope renewed, sometimes in the gentle touch of a daughter, sometimes in the steady gaze of a friend, and sometimes, most miraculously, on 4 steadfast hooves.